They act kind. They act loyal. They make you believe you can trust them. And yet somehow you feel drained, doubted, and off balance. That's subtle manipulation. It doesn't always hit like a punch. Sometimes it whispers. It confuses. It slowly rewires how you see yourself. You start questioning your instincts, second-guessing your choices, and wondering if you're overreacting. That's how skilled manipulators operate. They hide their claws behind a smile, and before you realize it, the chaos is in your mind. Stoicism teaches a different way. True power isn't in fighting back, it's in staying unshakable. It's in holding your peace, guarding your mind, and moving through life with intention, no matter what games others play. It's about mastering yourself so that no one else can dictate your value or your emotions. When you operate from that place, chaos loses its grip, and control returns to you. In this video, you'll discover 15 rules that turn the tables on manipulators. Not with anger, drama, or confrontation, but with clarity, calm, and strategic action. These aren't just tactics. They're a roadmap to reclaim your presence, protect your energy, and make sure no one ever controls you without your permission. You'll learn how to stay steady when others wobble, how to respond without giving power away, and how to rise above manipulation with grace and precision. By the end, you won't just see manipulation, you'll become untouchable. You'll understand how to navigate the world with composure, confidence, and control. And you'll never let someone else shake your peace again. Act as though you don't notice at first. Most people assume that the smartest, most effective way to deal with manipulation is to confront it directly, to call it out immediately the moment it appears in front of them. Yet what if that reaction, that very instant of exposure, is exactly what the manipulator has been waiting for? What if your response itself is the very trap they set, the hook they are dangling for you? The truth is that manipulators thrive when they are visible. They crave the opportunity to see exactly what triggers you. They want to measure the temperature of your emotions, your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, your deep-seated need for validation and reassurance. That is why, at the very start, the most powerful action you can take is nothing at all. Not out of fear, not out of hesitation, but out of calculated, deliberate calm. Understand this clearly. Pretending not to notice is not ignorance. It is a conscious and strategic choice. It is the act of quietly gathering information while revealing nothing of yourself in return. Pay close attention to the words people choose when they believe you are not paying attention. They often tell far more than when they are performing for an audience or trying to impress. This is the exact moment the mask begins to slip. This is the moment the underlying patterns, the real behaviors, are revealed for what they truly are. The Stoics taught that our greatest strength comes from mastering the focus of our attention, from carefully choosing where our energy flows. Not every battle deserves engagement. Not every storm requires you to drop your anchor. You can recognize the manipulative behaviors clearly and still decide not to intervene. Because when you withhold your reaction, you retain your power. And when your power remains intact, manipulators cannot penetrate your mind or influence your emotions as easily. There is a strange, almost sacred silence that arises when you watch someone attempt manipulation and fail. You allow them to speak their half-truths. You let them weave their stories. You let them smile a little too widely, behave a little too charmingly, act a little too friendly. And yet inside you remain calm, composed, and unshaken. You are simply observing, nothing more. When someone is convinced that they have successfully fooled you, that is precisely when they begin to falter. They speak more than they need to. They reveal more than they intend. They begin to believe in their own performance. And you are a mirror, reflecting nothing back, offering no validation or reaction. That silence you maintain is louder, far louder, than any accusation could ever be. Because true control rarely comes through confrontation. It comes through remaining utterly unshaken, through composure that cannot be disturbed. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That flare of irritation you feel when someone attempts to manipulate you, it is not a signal to explode, to lash out, or to defend yourself. It is a signal to observe, to watch closely, to understand deeply. The more you grasp the strategies, the tactics, the subtle methods they use, the less power those tactics have over you. and the less likely you are to fall into their trap. You do not need to fix them. You do not need to teach them lessons or correct their behavior. All you need is patience, the discipline to watch until they reveal themselves fully without ever realizing that they have done so. Holding your reaction is not a weakness. It is a deliberate, disciplined act. And in a world full of noise, chaos, and distraction, discipline is a rare and precious strength. This is not passivity. This is the power of stillness until action has true value. You will sense when the moment is right. The energy in the room will shift. Their confidence will begin to crack. Their words will stretch further than is sustainable. And in that moment, you will see it, the desperation beneath the performance. The hunger to be believed, to be validated, to control perception. That is the root of manipulation. The unquenchable desire to influence how others see them. But you? You do not grant them that power. You refuse to play the role that they have written for you. You choose presence over panic, patience over pride, awareness over reaction. That is Stoicism in action. Responding with principle, not with impulse. Most people lose the game before it has even begun because they expose too much of themselves. Too soon. They become emotionally entangled. They argue. They try to prove themselves right. But manipulators do not play fair. They care little for truth. Their focus is always on control. And every time you react, every time you hand them even a small part of your attention or energy, you give them more rope to pull, more leverage to manipulate. That is why strategic ignorance is not about pretending to be naive or uninformed. It is about being intelligent, aware, and disciplined enough not to be baited. Think about all the arguments you could have avoided if you simply allowed silence to speak for you. Think about how many people revealed their true nature when you stopped justifying yourself or trying to explain your actions. There is a type of profound peace in no longer needing to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. You do not have to expose them immediately. You do not need to correct their story or alter the narrative. You only need to remain centered, grounded, and steady. It is difficult, of course. When you see someone spreading lies, subtly undermining your character, your instinct screams to fight back, to set the record straight, to declare your truth. But here is the critical insight. The moment you begin to defend yourself to someone who has already chosen their version of you, you have already ceded the ground. You are fighting on their terms, in their arena, and that is not where your power lies. Your power lies in remaining unmoved, in living in a way so rooted in truth that the falsehoods inevitably collapse under their own weight. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." These moments, when someone attempts to twist your image, are the friction you face, not to destroy you, but to reveal the true strength of your character, the durability of your stone. There is nothing louder than the silence of someone who sees through deception and says nothing. It is unsettling. Manipulators despise unpredictability. They want you loud, emotional, reactive. That way, they can twist your reaction into evidence of their narrative. But when you remain calm, when you allow their words to hang in the air unanswered, you strip them of momentum and power. People begin to notice your composure. They begin to question the effort the manipulator is putting into their story. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the narrative begins to shift. Not because you argued better, but because you refuse to react. Because you refuse to validate the performance with your attention. That is not passivity. That is control. You discover more about people when you stop talking, when you stop correcting them, when you stop trying to win their approval. That is when they relax enough to reveal their true selves. It is a strange, almost magical gift, watching a person unfold. Observing the jokes they make, the way they speak about others, the inconsistencies in their narratives. When you are not distracted by trying to earn their approval, you finally see what is right in front of you. And sometimes what is in front of you is someone carefully playing a game. That is okay. You do not need to call it out. You do not need to intervene. Simply observe, take note. And above all, remember how it made you feel. Your emotional response is a compass, not a trigger for reaction, but a guide to set your boundaries going forward. Not every manipulator acts with malice. Some are deeply insecure. Some may not even be aware of what they are doing, but that does not mean you should tolerate it. Stoicism is not about letting people walk over you. It is about choosing your battles, defending your peace, and maintaining your principles. You ignore not to be nice. You ignore to remain aligned with your values. And when you live according to values instead of fleeting emotions, you become remarkably difficult to manipulate. Nothing they do can disturb what you have already built within yourself. It is not always about outsmarting them. Sometimes it is simply about refusing to play their game entirely. The most formidable person in the room is the one who has nothing to prove. The one who is not easily flattered. The one who does not react to jabs. The one who sees through every mask but never rushes to tear it off. They understand a profound truth: time exposes all things. Pressure reveals intention. Silence is often the most effective response to dismantle a performance. So the next time someone tries to tempt you with smooth words or sharp edges, pause. Do not react. Do not explain. Do not feed the fire. Just notice, observe, feel, watch. And in that stillness, allow them to reveal everything you need to know. Once you have seen it, truly seen it, you cannot unsee it. And that clarity, precisely that clarity, is the beginning of freedom, not just from them, but from the part of yourself that once craved their approval. You are not here to dance for someone else's comfort. You are here to live rooted in truth, present in your own being, steady in your peace. Sometimes, the only way to protect that peace is to act as though you do not notice the chaos until the moment you are ready to walk away from it entirely. Let their words fade into silence. There's a peculiar kind of discomfort that fills a room when you do not respond the way someone expects you to, especially if that someone is a manipulator. They speak in a certain rhythm, with a cadence carefully crafted to pull you into their current, to provoke a reaction, to guide you where they want. Manipulators know exactly which words to deploy to prod at your insecurities, to trigger guilt, to instill a sense of urgency. Yet what they do not anticipate, what unsettles them far more than any argument, more than any clash, is your silence, that deliberate pause, that calm stillness that refuses to engage. Silence does not confirm anything. It does not agree. It does not resist. It simply exists. And within that space, manipulators begin to squirm. They do not know how to respond. Their control falters because their entire strategy relies on your reaction. You see, manipulators are, in a sense, artists of influence. Their brush is your reaction. Their canvas is your expression, your face, your energy. And when you offer them nothing to paint on, they are left stranded, standing with their tools in hand, unsure of how to proceed. We have been conditioned to believe that silence equates to weakness, that if we do not speak, we are losing, that if we do not respond, we have nothing of value to contribute. Yet the truth is far different. Silence, when wielded with intention, is the strongest possible response. It is not a void of power. It is its concentration, its refinement, its quiet assertion. When someone throws a passive-aggressive remark in your direction or questions your motives with a smile that hides their intent, the temptation to respond is enormous. The instinct is to fire back, to clarify, to justify, to explain. But each time you do, you hand them a key, a door through which they can shape the narrative, reel you in, and reinforce their control. They draw you into their rhythm. And the longer you allow yourself to remain there, the more they spin their web. Silence, however, acts as your reset button. It is the means by which you step out of their storm, out of their manipulation, and into your own calm, anchored presence. Carl Jung once wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." When you are deeply attuned to your inner world, your emotions, your triggers, your habitual responses, you no longer feel compelled to react to every provocation. You recognize that most provocations are projections, that most accusations are little more than confessions hidden in disguise. Choosing silence is not ignoring. It is observing. It is a conscious decision not to carry the weight of someone else's emotional chaos. In that quiet, you create the space to respond not out of impulse, but from clarity, from insight, from true understanding of the dynamics at play. Manipulators despise empty space. They fear hearing their own words bounce back with no echo of compliance, no affirmation of their intended control. It is like watching a puppet show with no audience. The act falters, the illusion collapses, the power of performance dissipates. Because manipulators are rarely speaking to you, they are speaking for your reaction. And when that reaction does not come, when you do not feed the script, their authority slips through their fingers. Silence makes them question everything about their performance. Did it land? Did you notice? Are you playing naive or are you playing intelligent? That uncertainty is unnerving. It forces them to confront the emptiness at the heart of their tactics. And within that uncertainty, you gain the upper hand without lifting a single finger. But silence is not about pretending nothing occurred. It is about discerning what deserves your energy, understanding that not every statement, every jab, every provocation warrants a response. Some things are far better left unanswered because they reveal far more about the speaker than they ever could about you. Consider an insult. If you respond with anger, they gain confirmation. They see that they have succeeded in affecting you. But if you remain steady, calm, and unflinching, the power shifts. The insult hangs in the air, lands nowhere, dissipates without consequence. Your lack of reaction robs it of significance. Silence functions not only as a response, but as a boundary. It communicates, I hear you, but I refuse to engage. It is a refusal to enter the chaos of someone else's making. It is a way of saying, I will not be drawn into your world merely because you feel uncomfortable in mine. This is a Stoic act, not suppressing emotion, but directing it, channeling it where it matters. And sometimes that requires saying absolutely nothing, not out of fear, but out of mastery. Think back to the last argument you regret. Chances are it started with something minor, a sarcastic remark, a subtle jab, a guilt-laden comment. Before long, you were deeply engaged, explaining yourself, raising your voice, defending your intentions. But what if instead you had paused? What if you had allowed their words to echo into silence instead of responding? That one choice could have shifted everything, not just in that moment, but in the relationship over time. When manipulators realize they cannot draw you into emotional conflict, they either stop attempting or they reveal just how dependent their behavior is on your reaction. Silence also provides the space for truth to emerge, for perspective to sharpen. It allows you to notice the recurring patterns, the moments they target your vulnerability, the ways they twist your words in the presence of others. These things become visible only when you are not distracted by reacting, only when you are not lost in defending your image. Stillness grants clarity. You see more, you hear more, you understand more. And what you uncover in that silence may ultimately be what sets you free. Yet, let us be honest. Silence is not easy. The urge to correct the narrative, to ensure others see your side, especially when your character is challenged, is strong. That impulse, that need to explain yourself, often stems from fear. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of losing control, fear of appearing weak. But what if your stillness is the very source of your strength? What if refraining from reaction is the exact opposite of weakness? It is wisdom. The most grounded individuals you meet are seldom the loudest. They observe more than they speak. They do not rush to justify themselves. They do not need to explain every decision. This is what makes them so difficult to predict, so resistant to manipulation, so unassailable. Manipulators rely on predictability. Silence disrupts it. It creates uncertainty where they crave control. And uncertainty is a powerful lever. It places the pressure squarely back on them. So when the moment comes, and it inevitably will, when someone tries to provoke you into reacting, pause. Take a deep breath. Stand firm. Let their words linger in the air. Let silence accomplish what your voice does not need to. Because that choice, that quiet, deliberate act of self-control, is a form of power few will ever truly recognize. It is the moment you stop being their puppet and begin being your own anchor, rooted and unshakable. Command your own story. There is something profoundly unsettling about being misrepresented. Someone takes a fragment of what you said, stretches it, twists it, bends it in ways you never intended. and suddenly you find yourself defending a version of yourself that does not even exist. It doesn't require much. A few misplaced words, a couple of raised eyebrows, and suddenly you are caught in a storm you never created. Instinctively, we want to clear it up. We want to explain, justify, correct. We want to defend ourselves against an illusion, a distortion. But here's the crucial truth. The more you chase after someone else's version of your story, the further you drift away from your own reality. Because defending yourself is not the same as leading your story. If you do not claim the pen, someone else will write your character, and they rarely write it with kindness or accuracy. In this world, people believe what they feel faster than what they hear. When perception is strong, facts are powerless. And that is precisely where many fall into the trap. They attempt to fight lies with facts. Yet perception does not operate on facts alone. It runs on energy, tone, presence, and consistency. That is why it is not sufficient merely to react to the distortion. You must reshape the entire frame, not with force, not with loud protestations, but with stillness, clarity, and unwavering consistency. You do not shout truth at people, you embody it. Because once you begin attempting to convince others of your character, you have already ceded control of the narrative. You are now dancing in someone else's story, following someone else's script. The Stoics understood this principle profoundly. Integrity is something you live. It is not something you argue for. To command your story does not mean becoming defensive, anxious, or obsessed with how others perceive you. It means carefully choosing the image you reflect through your actions and holding to it steadfastly, regardless of who misinterprets or misreads it. This is how clarity is built, slowly, silently, deliberately. The more someone tries to distort or twist who you are, the stronger your impact becomes when you do not flinch. You continue doing the work, following your path, speaking calmly, living cleanly, and allowing time to do what noise never could. Reveal the truth. Truth has a peculiar habit of rising when you stop forcing it. There is a quiet, almost magnetic authority in not needing to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It is difficult, of course, especially when falsehoods spread faster than you can contain them. Especially when those you once trusted begin to hesitate or question. That ache, that pressure in your chest, when your name is whispered on someone else's tongue. It is real, but reacting emotionally only fuels the story they seek to create. This is precisely what manipulators hope for. They want your reaction to serve as proof, evidence that you are guilty or compromised. But when you remain calm, composed, and measured, when you resist running to defend yourself every time someone misquotes or misrepresents you, you unsettle them. You make observers pause. Why is he so composed? Why does she remain calm? That pause is where your true strength resides. And in that stillness, people begin to question whether the version they heard is accurate at all. Your story is built through action, not explanation. People may hear rumors, but they remember patterns. If your life demonstrates consistency, if your values manifest in how you carry yourself, that becomes the story that endures. It sticks, even when others try to rewrite it. The more grounded you are in your identity, the harder it is for anyone to shake it. Because eventually, people start trusting what they see over what they hear. And what they see is someone who does not need the crowd's approval to remain upright in their truth. Sometimes the smartest move is not to confront gossip directly. It is to overshadow it. To show up so consistently, so calmly, so confidently, that any whisper of manipulation fades into the background. Those who matter will observe how you conduct yourself under pressure, how you speak when provoked, how you move when others attempt to pull you down. That grace, that composure speaks far more than any defense ever could. You do not prove your worth with arguments. You prove it with posture, with patience, with the unshakable belief that your truth requires no protection, it requires presence. Consider all the energy wasted chasing narratives, the sleepless nights wondering what is being said, the emotional labor spent defending yourself to people who were never truly listening in the first place. Now imagine redirecting that energy, building something real, becoming stronger, quieter, sharper, more focused. Let your results speak so powerfully that every lie collapses under its own emptiness. This is how you reclaim control, not by wrestling with rumors or countering every false story, but by rising above them. That is the essence of commanding your own story. You do not merely speak the truth. You live it in a way that cannot be imitated or falsified. There is wisdom in recognizing that not every false narrative requires a response. Some lies die for lack of attention. Not all fires deserve your engagement. Some are better left to burn themselves out. The more you chase misperceptions, the more oxygen you give them. But when you stop engaging, when you remove your fuel, the fire loses its strength. And people notice. They notice when you replace defense with execution, explanation with action, anxiety with dignity. To own your story is to understand that your life itself is your voice. How you respond to misrepresentation reflects your inner strength. When you react emotionally, others control your image. When you remain composed, intentional, and steadfast, the power returns to you. This is what Stoicism teaches. Not indifference, but disciplined focus. Not suppression, but careful allocation of energy. You cannot control what others say, but you can control your actions, your work, and what you build. The more you dedicate yourself to building something meaningful, the less space there is to worry about narratives written by people who never saw the full picture. That is the price and the reward of remaining true to yourself. Not everyone will understand it. That is acceptable. Those who matter will not need to be convinced. They will feel it. And when they do, the lies will lose all power. The story, in the end, will belong entirely to you. Subtly break the circle manipulators almost never operate in isolation. Their power is magnified when they act within groups, alliances, quiet circles of influence, networks of loyalty that function just beneath the surface, often invisible to those outside. Their strength is not derived from being loud or obvious. It grows in whispers, in shared glances, in subtle gestures and carefully planted seeds of influence that make others question their own loyalties, often without ever realizing it. It is rarely the words themselves that hold the most power. It is the tone, the implication, the silent, almost imperceptible cues. Once these circles are formed, they feed on one another. They reinforce the manipulator's control, often without instructions, without anyone needing to be told what to do. This is why confronting a manipulator directly often fails. They have already built their safety net, anticipating every move and reaction. Yet even the most tightly bound alliances can become fragile when uncertainty starts creeping in. One loose thread can gradually unravel the entire web. There is no need to attack. You do not need to expose anyone. That only invites resistance and strengthens their story. The wiser approach is to become the quiet disruptor. Slowly, methodically, without a single word, shift the balance. Make them begin to question what they believed was unshakable. Compliment one member of the group more than the others. Ask their opinion privately, one-on-one. Give subtle differences in your attention and acknowledgement, not because you are being dishonest, but because you are forcing independent thought. Once that thinking begins, the silence inside the group grows almost deafening. Jealousy is subtle, yet potent. It does not require a spotlight. All it needs is a small imbalance, a tiny discrepancy to make someone wonder, why them and not me? These small, deliberate adjustments do not create chaos by themselves, yet they magnify existing cracks, widening fractures that were already present but hidden. Manipulators often construct alliances on unstable foundations: flattery, fear, mutual enemies. By introducing even a hint of tension or imbalance, those foundations begin to show. People begin to talk less, trust less, and gradually start to prioritize themselves over the manipulator's agenda. At this moment, the manipulator's momentum falters. No manipulator can continue thriving in a space where their own circle starts observing each other more carefully than they observe you. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In this context, it reminds us that being underestimated is a profound form of power. While others expend their energy maintaining appearances, you are free to observe, influence, and act from a position of calm detachment. Insecure people constantly seek validation, and manipulators exploit this need. They weaponize the human desire to belong, to feel favored, to feel safe within the group. But if you introduce even a trace of doubt, if you withhold a small portion of your attention, recognition, or approval, the spell begins to weaken. Gradually, the group's energy shifts. People feel uncertainty creeping in. They stop relying on each other in the ways they once did. You begin to notice it in subtle ways. The pause between messages, the slightly awkward glance across the room, the hesitation when someone nods too quickly. These small, cumulative moments are powerful, not because you acted dramatically, but because you acted with restraint, saying less than usual. And they notice, the key to this strategy is never to appear as if you are trying to divide anyone. You do not need to plant false stories, whisper toxic comments, or generate conflict. This is not about deceit. It is about controlling your presence, regulating your energy, and allowing it to become selective. When people are unsure of where they stand with you, they reveal more of their true selves. They ask questions, observe more closely, and begin analyzing the behaviors of those they once trusted unquestioningly. The manipulator's influence begins to crack, not because you directly challenge them, but because you stepped back just enough to allow the room to rebalance itself naturally. This subtle disruption requires emotional discipline. The temptation to call out manipulation, point fingers, or expose dishonesty is strong, especially when the deception is obvious. But that is precisely what manipulators want. They thrive when you react emotionally, when you lose composure, when you show instability. That reaction strengthens their influence over the group. If you can resist the urge, if you remain composed while others scramble for control, you reclaim the room without ever raising your voice. You do not break the circle through confrontation. You break it by making it uncomfortable for them to remain unchallenged in their dynamics. Over time, the shifts happen naturally. People begin drifting toward new conversations, seeking different alliances. The manipulator senses it first, even if they hide their unease. The tight circle they meticulously built no longer feels safe. Questions linger. Did someone speak? Did someone act? Is someone maneuvering? But there is no visible culprit. That is the brilliance of this strategy. You never accuse, never defend. You simply create conditions less favorable to manipulation. There is immense power in being the one who does not seek validation, who does not perform for attention, and who does not attempt to be liked by everyone. That presence, that quiet, unwavering confidence, disrupts dynamics built on insecurity. People notice that you are not easily flattered, that your availability is more limited, that your words carry weight because you speak less. In contrast, the manipulator appears eager, rehearsed, and overly calculated. You do not need to announce the difference. The contrast becomes visible naturally. If you maintain this stance long enough, people come to you, not for gossip or drama, but for clarity. They probe subtly, observe reactions, and when they see that you do not participate in manipulation or fuel conflict, they begin trusting your silence more than the noise of others. That trust, that quiet, commanding influence moves people without force. This is how manipulation is dismantled, not through confrontation, but through contrast. The contrast between someone who needs power to feel secure and someone who is secure without needing control. The manipulator's greatest fear is not being exposed. It is being irrelevant. When those they once influenced no longer need their approval, their tactics collapse. They speak and no one listens. They suggest and hesitation follows. The spotlight shifts, not because you grabbed it, but because you remained rooted while everything else spun out of control. This is the essence of Stoicism in practice. Influence through presence, not performance. Let others scramble for attention. You remain the calm center, the one who does not chase, does not beg, and does not flinch. That calm, steady presence is what ultimately reshapes the room, quietly but powerfully. Let the cracks speak for themselves. There is a subtle trap that many fall into the moment they finally recognize someone's manipulation clearly. The overwhelming urge to call it out, to expose it, to warn others, to shine a bright light on what has been happening quietly behind the scenes. Yet that very impulse, though it may feel righteous and justified, often serves the manipulator's purpose more than your own. Because the instant you speak too forcefully, too directly, too emotionally, the roles instantly flip. The manipulator becomes the misunderstood one, the supposed victim, the person who appears under attack from someone suddenly a bit too intense, a bit too reactive. And just like that, the dynamics of the room shift. Doubt spreads. The attention moves away from their actions and settles instead on your reaction. Suddenly, you are no longer the observer revealing truth. You are the one who seems unstable, who appears to be overreacting. This is why pointing does not work. It seldom convinces anyone. But revealing, that is entirely different. Manipulators survive on their ability to maintain the appearance of innocence. Their power is anchored in presentation, the mask, the timing, the carefully chosen words and gestures. So when you try to tear that mask off with force, they make it seem as though you are the one causing harm. That is why the wiser approach is not to accuse, but to observe, to notice and comment gently, to ask thoughtful, carefully worded questions. Isn't it interesting that this only happens when she isn't here? Didn't he say the exact opposite last week? These are not attacks, they are subtle mirrors. Mirrors do not lie. They merely reflect what is already there. The essential strategy is to remain composed. You do not need to convince anyone of anything. You do not have to be the messenger of ultimate truth. All that is required is to offer gentle clarity in the place where confusion once lived. Manipulators operate in the shadows. When you carefully open the blinds, people begin to notice on their own. People rarely change because someone told them to. They change when they sense a discrepancy between what they are being told and what they are beginning to perceive for themselves. That perception grows stronger when your tone is calm, your words are precise, and your presence is steady and grounded. The louder you try to be, the more defensive others become. But when you pose a calm, thoughtful question that subtly exposes a contradiction, you plant a seed. That seed may not sprout immediately, but over time it will grow quietly, imperceptibly, yet powerfully. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most dangerous things are not our enemies, but the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge." The same principle applies in how we relate to others. Most people do not want to admit they have been misled. They do not want to acknowledge that someone they respected, liked, or admired was, in fact, using them. So when you point too directly, you confront not only the manipulator, but also the ego of everyone else involved. And the ego does not relinquish its grip easily. That is why your role is not to tear down the mask. It is to allow it to crack naturally. Cracks appear when reality and illusion begin to diverge so widely that they can no longer occupy the same shape. There is an art to letting people draw their own conclusions. It demands patience. It demands restraint. It demands trust that the truth does not need to shout in order to be recognized. When you gently highlight inconsistencies, when you maintain emotional neutrality, you allow the facts to do the work for you. You do not create drama. You do not appear to have an agenda. You simply hold space for reality to reveal itself gradually, inevitably, and unmistakably. Over time, people begin to notice patterns. They remember moments that did not make sense at first, and they revisit past interactions with a new perspective. As they start connecting the dots, they begin to perceive what was always there, hidden in plain sight. That is when the real shift occurs, not when you force them to pick sides, but when they start questioning the narrative themselves. People hate being manipulated, but they hate being seen as gullible even more. When they begin suspecting that someone has been playing them, they turn into their own detectives. They start paying closer attention. They ask more questions. Slowly, the manipulator finds the ground beneath them becoming unstable. Not because you attacked, but because their own story can no longer withstand scrutiny and pressure. It is also vital to recognize your role in this process. You are not there to destroy anyone. You are not the judge or the enforcer. You are simply the one who sees, and that alone is powerful enough. You can shift the entire dynamic of a room simply by being the one who is not fooled, who does not react, who does not feed the performance. That kind of composed presence encourages reflection rather than conflict. And within that reflection, subtle changes begin to take root. The more you attempt to control how others perceive the manipulator, the more resistance you encounter. But the less you try, and the more you focus on speaking clearly, asking questions thoughtfully, and living with integrity, the more others begin to sense the gap between truth and performance. You do not need to chase trust. You simply need to become a stable reference point of honesty. And when people start to lose faith in the manipulator's version of events, they naturally turn to the calmest person in the room, the one who never reacted but always observed. Even if the shift takes time, even if it is gradual, it is authentic and lasting. Once someone notices a crack, they cannot unsee it. Manipulation only works while the illusion remains whole. Once fractured, it begins collapsing under every repeated performance. The manipulator eventually speaks louder, works harder, and becomes increasingly desperate to maintain control. And herein lies the irony. In their effort to retain dominance, they reveal their desperation. The very individuals they once influenced begin to step back, not because they were instructed to, but because they finally perceive what you have seen all along. Ultimately, your strength lies in calm awareness, in the ability to perceive without demanding to be perceived, to understand without insisting on understanding, to speak when necessary, and to remain silent when it matters more. The truth has its own rhythm. It does not need to rush. It only needs space. When you create that space, without accusation, without ego, the truth inevitably rises. It always does, quietly, fully, and undeniably. Become the one they cannot do without. There is a form of power that never needs to raise its voice, never seeks attention, never performs for recognition, and never announces its value. Yet the moment it leaves the room, its absence is immediately felt by everyone present. This is the type of presence manipulators find unbearable. It upends their entire game. You are no longer running after them, no longer scrambling to prove your worth or gain approval. Instead, your quiet usefulness speaks so clearly that they find themselves depending on you, often without even realizing it. And when they need you more than you need them, the balance shifts entirely. Manipulators operate by convincing others that they possess something everyone else desires: approval, information, connection, or opportunity. They cultivate a sense of scarcity, a subtle pressure that compels people to impress them, to win their favor, to remain indispensable in their eyes. But what if you inverted that dynamic? What if you became the one presence in the room they could not replace or ignore? You do not need to beg for respect when you bring undeniable value to the table. Whether it is your skills, your insight, your calm in the midst of chaos, or your ability to execute flawlessly when others cannot, you become indispensable by doing what few are willing to do, delivering consistently, without drama, without needing acknowledgement. This is not about servitude or bending over backward. It is about precision, being strategic with what you offer and when you offer it. You contribute just enough to make a difference. You solve a problem. You make processes smoother, faster, or more effective. Then, just as they begin to feel secure with your presence, you pull back slightly. You become less available. You let your absence reverberate, because in the quiet that follows, they begin to realize what they have lost. And in that realization, the dynamics begin to change. There is no manipulation in being genuinely valuable. In fact, the more grounded your intentions, the more potent this effect becomes. You are not attempting to trap anyone. You are simply allowing your competence and disciplined presence to speak louder than words ever could. This is precisely what Stoic philosophy advocates. True strength does not manifest in loud proclamations, but in the measured way you carry yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That principle forms the foundation. Let your actions create leverage, not your words, not your debates, but your quiet, unwavering consistency. When someone begins to rely on you, not emotionally, but functionally, because you make processes work, because you solve what others complicate, they start excusing your silence. They tolerate your boundaries. They accept your absence. And ironically, the more centered and calm you remain, the greater the space they afford you. You create a subtle gap between how they treat others and how they treat you, because they now understand what they stand to lose. This does not mean becoming cold or transactional. It means choosing precisely when to engage fully, choosing how much to give, mastering the rhythm of your presence, offering just enough value without becoming indispensable in a way that diminishes your autonomy. This is where true control resides, not in dominance but in equilibrium, not in constant availability but in knowing the exact moment to step back. Manipulators cannot maintain influence over those they cannot predict. When you become intentionally unpredictable, not chaotic but measured and composed, they lose their grasp. And what cannot be read cannot be controlled. It is a fascinating phenomenon to witness someone shift from dismissal to dependence. One day they overlook you. The next they circle back, seeking your insight, waiting for your guidance, requiring your input. Yet you do not rush to provide it. You do not act impatient or reactive. You operate with precision. You show up with calm energy, contribute where necessary, and retreat without fanfare. That silence communicates more than any speech ever could. It declares, I do not need your approval, but you need mine. And that imbalance begins to unravel the manipulative hold. The reality is that manipulators are drawn to people who want something: attention, validation, connection. That desire is the thread they tug. Remove that desire, withdraw your dependency, and they are left without leverage. If you reverse the flow, making them the ones who depend on your presence and contribution, the thread slips from their hands. They cannot manipulate your buttons if they no longer know where to press. They cannot withhold approval if you are not seeking it. They cannot oscillate hot and cold if you have already found your own equilibrium. You become the calm within the storm, the steady presence they cannot anticipate or control. When they recognize that they cannot replace you, they grow silent, not from respect, but from uncertainty. In their world, people scramble for attention and proximity, yet you walk your own path. If they wish to access your time or energy, they must adjust to your rhythm. This is not arrogance, it is sovereignty over your presence, your time, and your energy. You offer them like a gift, not as a transaction. This alone creates a dynamic few manipulators can endure. What becomes even more powerful is pairing that usefulness with detachment, providing value not because you seek approval or validation, but because it is an expression of who you are. And once your work is done, you step away without explanation, without emotional follow-up, simply disappearing quietly. That absence creates space for reflection. It compels them to recognize the weight of your contributions, the stability you provided, and the value of your presence that went previously unnoticed. That is when they begin to come seeking you. That is when they reach out, but you are no longer reacting, you are observing. Once someone realizes they need you more than you need them, you acquire a form of freedom rarely experienced. The freedom to say yes intentionally, to say no without guilt, to lead without noise, to exit without closure. This is true power, quiet, calm, and undeniable. The kind that does not shout, does not chase, and never needs to prove itself, because it already understands its worth. Reflect their energy. Until it unravels, manipulators thrive on motion. They need to watch you flinch, hesitate, defend yourself, or bend. That is how they gauge their control, by measuring how much of yourself you give away in reaction to their performance. But what occurs when you stop resisting? When, instead of pushing back or getting drawn into their frame, you simply reflect their energy back at them as though you were a mirror. That subtle adjustment shifts everything profoundly, because mirrors do not react. They do not explain, correct, or argue. They simply reflect. And when someone observes their own behavior calmly mirrored back at them, without distortion, without judgment, it becomes deeply uncomfortable very quickly. This is not about mocking, imitating, or manipulating them in return. It is about remaining emotionally still, present, composed, yet unreadable. When they lie, you do not rush to expose them. You allow them to speak, nodding just enough for them to feel heard, and then you ask a gentle question, without accusation, that does not attack, but subtly reveals. Something like, "Weren't your words different last week?" That single question acts as a mirror. Suddenly, they are confronted with themselves. There is no emotional reaction for them to exploit, no fight to escalate into drama, just calm observation. And in that quiet space, the first cracks begin to appear. Manipulators rely on rhythm. They orchestrate loops of praise, blame, guilt, affection, whatever keeps you slightly off balance, emotionally engaged. If you get angry, they act calm. If you cry, they appear disappointed. It is a script, and it only functions as long as you play your predictable part. The moment you stop reacting as expected, the performance begins to collapse. When they flatter you, you smile, acknowledge it briefly, and then redirect. When they provoke, you respond with calm curiosity. They no longer know how you will act, and that uncertainty unsettles them. When a manipulator cannot understand why you are not reacting, arguing, or trying to fix the situation, they start to look inward, not in a reflective, constructive way, but in a paranoid, overanalyzing way. They repeat themselves, over-explain, and fidget with their own behavior. That is the energy unraveling. That is the script collapsing. This technique only works if you remain calm. The mirror is only effective when it reflects faithfully. That means no sarcasm, no smugness, no passive-aggressive jabs. You are not attempting to win a battle, you are revealing patterns. And often the most effective way to do that is simply to stop providing resistance. Because when they lose the conflict, they lose their fuel. When you maintain neutrality, their extremes become more visible to everyone observing. You do not need to point it out. The contrast speaks for itself. The approach is particularly potent when repeated behaviors emerge. If someone constantly interrupts, pause and allow the silence to resonate. If they deliver hollow compliments, you respond with equivalent neutrality and then let the exchange die. The energy rebounds and suddenly they are the only one in motion. This imbalance is profoundly powerful because manipulators cannot handle stillness. They cannot twist it, blame it, or feed off it. It forces them to confront their own patterns, now stripped of your emotional engagement. Initially, it may feel unnatural, especially if you are accustomed to justifying yourself or being overly polite. But mirroring is not about coldness, it is about clarity. You are not pretending, you are simply withholding access to your emotional reactions. You do not absorb their manipulative energy. You reflect it gently, compelling them to sit with their own projected energy. This is when cracks begin to appear, not only in their behavior, but in the perception of others. Observers start to notice the calm you maintain as the manipulator escalates. They perceive the contradiction in the manipulator's words because you do not argue. You create space for truth to emerge organically. This is how you reclaim the environment. Not by volume, but by clarity, by letting their energy coexist with yours while allowing others to experience the difference. The more you practice, the clearer it becomes how frequently people attempt to pull you into their chaos. Some act consciously, others unconsciously. Either way, the mirror functions. It does not attack, absorb, or distort. It simply reflects. That reflection forces a pause. They hear their own words with fresh awareness. They feel the weight of their tone, the emptiness of their tactics. Without a single word from you, the manipulation begins to crumble. You will recognize its effectiveness when they act confused, when they check if everything is all right, despite your non-reactive demeanor. When they repeat themselves, alter tactics, or falter, they are losing control. But you do not intervene. You allow the process to unfold naturally. The instant you return to old reactive patterns, they pounce. But if you maintain your stillness, the performance continues to unravel. When the collapse is complete, when they understand they cannot manipulate, provoke, or control you, they turn their focus elsewhere. Manipulation cannot survive where energy does not respond. It requires drama, movement, emotional feedback. Your calm presence, your quiet, reflective stance offers nothing for them to exploit. That is the essence of the strategy. You do not destroy the manipulator. They destroy the illusion themselves. By choosing non-reaction, you become rare, unshaken, unreadable. In a world where so many are easily destabilized, that stillness is magnetic. It speaks of strength without aggression, truth without noise, power without threat. You do not need to fight. You simply exist in a way that cannot be baited. When they eventually realize their tactics fail on you, it is already too late. The collapse has begun. Break their cycle. Through stillness, manipulators struggle in the presence of silence. They cannot operate effectively where there is structure, steadiness, or predictability. What sustains their game is instability, your emotional fluctuations, your doubts, your unpredictable reactions. The more off balance you are, the easier it is for them to influence you. This is how they gain control, not through overt force, but through small, calculated moments of chaos. They provoke a reaction and then feed on whatever emerges next. Most of the time, people do not even realize it is happening. They convince themselves they are simply having a bad day, or they blame themselves for being too sensitive, or they feel the need to over-explain. But what is truly occurring runs deeper, a pattern forming and reinforcing itself every time you break your own rhythm to match theirs. The moment you introduce stillness into that chaos, the pattern begins to fracture. Stillness is not inaction. It is not silence born from fear. It is something greater, an inner stance of calm, of steadiness, of refusing to be pulled into someone else's emotional storm. When you rise at the same hour every day, when your decisions are guided by your principles rather than your fleeting moods, when you remain consistent in how you speak, move, and think, something shifts. You become unreadable. You stop being available for emotional manipulation. You start to appear uninteresting to someone who thrives on unpredictability to maintain control. Routine may feel mundane, even robotic to some. But for those who recognize its strength, it is a shield. A grounded life is not one devoid of feeling. It is a life directed by purpose. And when you live with direction, you are less vulnerable to guilt trips, passive aggression, and emotional bait. That text you would have immediately replied to, you do not now. Not because you are avoiding it, but because your focus is already directed elsewhere. That jab that once pushed you into over-explaining, it passes through you without landing, because you have seen it before, and you no longer allow yourself to be pulled into the same reaction loop. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Patterns are not broken by accident. They must be recognized, named, and deliberately refused. And that demands discipline, not once, but every day. Each time you choose to remain on your path instead of stepping into their drama, you cut off the oxygen that sustains their manipulation. You stop playing the game. Eventually, without the fuel of resistance, they lose interest, not because you expelled them, but because there is nothing for them to cling to. Stillness is intolerable for manipulators because it leaves them with themselves. They cannot twist your words if you remain silent. They cannot escalate conflict if you refuse to react. They cannot leverage emotions if you do not provide them as currency. You remove their favorite tools, surprise, confusion, emotional swings, and replace them with rhythm, clarity, and inner peace. And peace is the one thing they cannot handle, because peace demands accountability, and accountability exposes true intention. You will recognize the power of stillness when life begins to feel calm, even boring, in the best sense. The drama no longer feels necessary. Anxiety diminishes. Overthinking softens. You no longer replay conversations trying to figure out what went wrong, because you stayed aligned. You did not abandon your center. You maintained your composure. That alignment grants a power that does not need to speak loudly. It manifests in the minimal access others have to your emotional state. They cannot predict your words, not because you are chaotic, but because you are unshakable. Living this way is not simple, especially if you have been conditioned to accommodate others at the expense of your own peace. Yet as you build this internal routine, a quiet rhythm that guides your life, you begin to recognize how much energy you previously gave away through reaction. You begin to see how many of your choices were dictated by avoiding discomfort rather than following clarity. And when that realization strikes, you cannot go back. You do not want to return, because the strength that comes from inner structure is far more valuable than any fleeting victory in an argument or emotional game. There is a quiet authority in someone who can enter chaos and remain unmoved, a person who does not need to defend, match the energy in the room, or even win. They simply continue acting with purpose, show up with clarity, move with intention, speak with precision. Over time, that steadiness becomes a mirror, It reflects the chaos back at those who create it. When they see themselves through your calm, they either adjust or depart. Not because you forced them out, but because there is no longer chaos to latch onto. The goal is not to become cold, it is to become consistent. To be the person whose peace is not easily disturbed. The kind of presence that can shift the energy of a room just by entering it, not through manipulation, but through example. Manipulators search for cracks. They probe for weaknesses. They test boundaries. But when all they encounter is discipline, when they observe you respond the same way on a difficult day as you do on a calm one, they realize there is nothing left to exploit. Stillness is not passive, it is intentional. It is cultivated through repetition. It is the result of ceasing to wait for others to dictate your tone and instead creating your own. Once you establish that tone, once your days follow purpose rather than reaction, you become a person who no longer entertains manipulation. You become too calm to provoke, too structured to confuse, and too focused to control. Slowly, the pattern dies, not with confrontation, not with loud defiance, but with silence, predictability, and the kind of unshakable strength that needs no validation. Maintain your routine. Keep doing the work. Keep showing up consistently no matter who observes. And when chaos returns seeking a foothold, let it pass. Not because you are avoiding life, but because you have built one that no longer reacts to the emotional turbulence of others. In that life, manipulation has no space to exist. It simply fades away because you no longer make room for it to survive. 9. Build a fortress, not just walls. Manipulators do not simply target individuals. They study entire environments. They search for weak points, not just in people, but in the dynamics around them. This is why even a strong, disciplined person surrounded by instability can be undermined. The strength of your character in isolation is only part of the equation. It is the environment you cultivate that truly matters. The people you allow in, the energy you tolerate, the conversations you engage in, all of it shapes your vulnerability. If the space around you is scattered, dramatic, or built on shallow connections, it becomes fertile ground for someone skilled at sowing conflict and feeding off division. That is why the wisest strategy is not merely to fortify yourself, but to strengthen the environment you inhabit. A manipulator will not boldly announce their intentions in a room of grounded individuals. They test subtly, saying something ambiguous, dropping a quiet jab, offering a compliment that feels slightly off. Then they observe who laughs, who remains silent, who participates. They seek cracks in the foundation, people who need validation, those desperate to be liked, or those who struggle with boundaries. These openings allow influence to creep in, one word at a time, one conversation at a time, until the collective dynamic slowly shifts into a space where honesty feels confrontational and silence feels suspicious. This is why avoiding toxic people is not sufficient. You must actively curate the soil in which you plant yourself. Ask yourself, are you surrounded by individuals who hold themselves accountable? People who communicate clearly yet kindly? Those capable of handling conflict without descending into chaos? If not, you will constantly feel on edge, not because of what is said, but because of what is implied, manipulated, or misrepresented. Stoic philosophy teaches us to guard our peace not only in solitude, but in the spaces we intentionally inhabit. You do not need a crowd of voices around you. You need a few steady ones. Those who do not flinch when truth is spoken. Those who remain consistent regardless of who enters the room. Building a fortress is not about becoming cold or rigid. It is about establishing standards. It is about making clear the energy you will engage with and what you will not, without the need for constant explanation. You do not need to argue for respect for your boundaries. You need only enforce them consistently. Those unable to handle the distance will remove themselves. That is the filter. The ones who remain form your circle, not because they agree with every word you say, but because they understand what it means to stand beside someone who refuses to play games. Carl Jung once observed that loneliness does not stem from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most. This is the tragedy of a weak environment. You can be surrounded and still feel isolated, still feel as if your clarity is too sharp, your truth too piercing, your silence too heavy. but the right people. Those who do the inner work, who understand their own patterns, who are unafraid to name things as they are, create a space where manipulation cannot survive. In rooms that value honesty, masks are unnecessary. A strong environment may not always be peaceful, but it will always be clear. Arguments will occur, disagreements will arise, but they will not descend into blame games or gossip. They will not linger in the shadows, quietly poisoning relationships. These are the conditions manipulators rely on: ambiguity, unspoken tension, people too fearful to confront reality directly. But when the air is clear, when feedback is given with care and received without ego, there is no room to hide. That clarity forms the walls of your fortress, not walls of isolation, but walls of intention. You notice the shift when conversations become healthier, when you no longer monitor every word you say, when you know that even if someone misunderstands you, they will come to you rather than go around you. Such trust is not accidental. It is cultivated deliberately by choosing people who do not thrive on drama, who take responsibility, who are unafraid of tension, but do not seek conflict. Those who stay when it is uncomfortable, not because they are trapped, but because they care enough to work through it. This may require leaving certain crowds behind. It may mean outgrowing old friendships, not because you are superior, but because you have gained clarity. Peace is not merely internal, it is something you protect externally. Such peace carries a cost. Fewer voices surround you, but those that remain carry weight. They uphold your standards, check you with care when needed, and most importantly, they never twist your truth into something it is not. Manipulators cannot survive in well-lit spaces. They cannot distort the narrative when everyone is attentive. They cannot divide when no one is interested in picking sides. To remove the threat, not only for yourself, but for those you value, you build an environment that does not require permission to be honest, that does not reward passive aggression, secrecy, or shallow flattery. You construct it deliberately, one conversation at a time, one decision at a time, until your life becomes a space where manipulation has no utility. Not because you fought it directly, but because you rendered it irrelevant. 10. Let them hang themselves with their own words. Most people, when they sense manipulation, feel the urge to strike back immediately. They want to tear the mask off, reveal the truth to everyone, catch the liar in the act. But that impulse is emotional. It comes from hurt, betrayal, from the deep need to be acknowledged, validated, and understood. And manipulators know exactly this. They are counting on it. Because if you act too soon, if you try to confront them before the room is ready, you end up appearing to be the problem, not them. The truth is not always received well, especially when it conflicts with what people want to believe. That is why patience matters. You observe, you wait, and you let them keep speaking. A manipulator rarely knows when they are being observed with clarity. They mistake your silence for ignorance. They assume your courtesy means you are still buying the act. That assumption is what gives them confidence. Confidence in their hands is dangerous, but also revealing. The more power they think they hold, the more careless they become. Lies grow bigger, stories become sloppier, and the tone turns arrogant. And slowly, without anyone pushing back, they begin to overstep. What once appeared charming now looks controlling. What once felt persuasive now feels rehearsed. And gradually, people begin to notice. Allowing someone to talk is not a weakness. It is strategy. When someone is performing, you do not interrupt the show. You let them finish their script. You let the audience settle in. Then, when contradictions start to accumulate, you do not point them out. You simply allow them to echo. Manipulation does not collapse under confrontation. It collapses under its own weight. People do not trust because you told them to. They trust because they observed it for themselves. That is why timing matters more than truth. The truth may be accurate, but if delivered too early, it is rejected. Too late, and the damage has already taken root. But delivered just in time, it shifts the energy in the room. This demands discipline. It requires biting your tongue when you long to defend yourself. It requires holding your ground when others have not yet seen what you see. It requires walking through moments of isolation where you alone understand what is truly happening. But that quiet strength, The ability to maintain your peace while others are drawn into a game you have already decoded is rare, and it is immensely powerful, because when the moment finally arrives, when the manipulator pushes too far and people begin connecting the dots, you do not need to say much. The room begins to turn on its own. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." This avoidance drives much of manipulation. It is not always malicious. It is often a refusal to be seen as they truly are. So they create roles, stories, and versions of themselves that keep people close without revealing what lies underneath. But pretending for too long is exhausting. Cracks begin to form. And when no one rushes to repair those cracks, when no one reacts, reassures, or takes the bait, they widen. Giving someone rope does not mean you are giving them control. It means you are creating the space for them to reveal who they are without your interference. It is tempting to accelerate the process, to force the truth to the surface. But pushing people to confront what they are not ready to see rarely ends well. That is why your silence is so important, not just for your own clarity, but for the integrity of the truth itself. It is not about winning. It is about allowing reality to unfold without pressure. You will know the rope is working when they start repeating themselves. When they bring up your name in rooms you are not in. When they try harder and harder to be liked, to gain trust, to maintain control, and you remain silent. You do not fuel the performance. That absence, your refusal to participate, creates a pressure they are unaccustomed to. They carry the entire performance themselves, and eventually they stumble over their own words. The most damaging kind of exposure is quiet. It is when the people around them begin to shift. When glances narrow, tones change, support softens. Not because someone spoke, but because the energy no longer lands the same way. That is real exposure, not confrontation, not proof, but transformation. What you are doing is holding a mirror, not to the manipulator, but to everyone else. And in that mirror, people begin to distinguish who is calm and who is performing, who is consistent and who is desperate, who speaks with intention and who speaks too often. When the room awakens to this, you do not need to intervene. The rope has done its work. They have spoken too much, twisted too far, overreached, and the consequences are built into their own behavior. This does not absolve you from protecting yourself. You still set boundaries, limit access, and step back. But you do not attempt to force exposure. That is the difference. You do not need to destroy someone. You merely stop feeding the illusion. Let silence perform its work. Let their overconfidence carry the weight. And when it collapses, let it fall without commentary. This level of restraint is rare, but it renders you untouchable. Someone who cannot be provoked, baited, or drawn into emotional traps. Such a person is dangerous to manipulators because they cannot be mapped or predicted, and that unpredictability is power. When you feel the urge to intervene, to correct the story, pause. Ask yourself, is the rope already working? Is the show already collapsing? Is the truth already circling, preparing to land? If it is, remain still, speak minimally, observe carefully, because in the end, the strongest move is to allow someone to reveal themselves slowly, through their own words, with no one to save them and no one to blame but themselves. Redirect their energy. Don't defend. When someone levels an accusation at you that feels wildly off base, your instinct is almost always to defend yourself, to explain, clarify, set the record straight, and prove what actually happened, or what they clearly misunderstood. That impulse is natural. It comes from wanting to be understood, from wanting the situation to make sense, from wanting to remove the tension hanging in the air. But that very impulse is exactly the doorway manipulators hope you walk through. Because once you start defending, you step into their arena. Now they control the conversation and you are chasing clarity inside a space they've already filled with confusion. That is why the smarter approach is not to defend, it is to redirect. Redirection doesn't mean avoiding the issue. It means shifting the responsibility of clarity back to where it belongs. When someone accuses you and you calmly ask, "Why do you think that?" the energy in the room changes. You are not rejecting the question. You are turning it back. You are inviting them to explain, to expose their reasoning. And that makes manipulators uncomfortable, because their power lives in implication, not explanation. They aim to suggest something is wrong with you without having to prove it. They rely on the room filling in the blanks. But when you calmly request clarity, you force them to become specific. And the more specific they get, the harder it becomes to twist the story. It is a subtle move, yet profoundly powerful. You do not match their emotion. You do not meet fire with fire. You simply stand still, with calm speech and a steady gaze, asking them to walk through their own accusation. That alone can make them hesitate. They now have to slow down. They have to think. And manipulators do not thrive in slow, thoughtful spaces. They thrive on speed, chaos, and emotional turbulence. They throw fragments at you, hoping you'll stumble. But if you pause, redirect, and maintain your ground, they are left to carry the weight of their own words. What others try to project onto you often reveals more about them than it does about you. That is why redirection is so effective. It returns the focus to the source of the accusation. Not aggressively, not as a trap, but as a means to bring things into the open. And once they are open, manipulation becomes far harder. Clarity dissolves confusion, and confusion is the playground of manipulation. This is not just about protecting yourself from false claims. It is about setting a new rhythm in the conversation, one that prioritizes logic over emotion, calm reflection over panic. And once that rhythm is established, you'll notice how quickly the energy shifts. The accuser must adjust their posture. They are forced either to be honest or step back, because your calm presence provides no fuel. You are not arguing, defending, or seeking approval. You are simply requesting clarity. Sometimes you are met with silence. Sometimes you receive long, circular responses that go nowhere. And sometimes they double down, hoping to unsettle you. But the beauty of this technique is that it works best when you say little, when you ask one question and then wait, when you resist filling the silence, when you do not get drawn into their tempo. That waiting is where your power lies, because it exposes the gap between accusation and truth. And the longer that gap lingers, the more those around you begin to sense it. You are not trying to win. You are maintaining a standard. That standard is simple. If someone wishes to claim something about your character, actions, or intentions, they must be able to support it. They must stand behind their words with clarity and confidence. If they cannot, then perhaps it was never about truth. Perhaps it was control disguised as concern. That is why redirection is so impactful. It does not fight, yet it does not submit. It stands firm. Manipulators are accustomed to movement. They thrive on provoking a chase. But when you stop running, when you refuse to pursue validation, they are left with their own discomfort. That discomfort often signals the beginning of the end for their strategy. This method also strengthens your emotional discipline. You begin to notice how frequently people speak merely to provoke a reaction. You recognize that accusations are rarely about truth. They are often about power. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You start prioritizing questions over statements, listening over explaining. And in doing so, you become someone difficult to rattle, someone who does not panic when tension rises. You redirect rather than react. It takes practice. At first, you will still feel the urge to explain. Your body tenses, your thoughts race, the need to fix spikes. But the moment you choose a question instead of a defense, the pace slows. That deliberate slowness, the controlled rhythm, is what manipulators cannot tolerate. They lose their grip when you do not mirror their energy, but instead invite them into yours. Over time, people learn they cannot twist your emotions. They see you do not operate in ambiguity. They recognize that you value clarity over comfort. That reputation becomes your shield. Others observe who can remain steady when chaos arises, who maintains a calm voice, who asks precise questions rather than launching into endless explanations. Gradually, the environment around you transforms, not because you fought anyone, but because you mastered the redirect. You demonstrated that calm does not mean passivity and stillness does not mean weakness. It signals that you understand where your power lies and that you are unafraid to use it. Harness the strength of tactical absence. Most people are addicted to constant availability, always online, always replying, always explaining themselves. And in that perpetual access, they unknowingly surrender control. Manipulators thrive in exactly that space. They observe your patterns, they track your habits. They test the doors you never lock. They learn precisely when to reach you, exactly how to ask, and exactly how long it takes before you give in. But the moment you disrupt that rhythm even slightly, their grip begins to falter. Because what they crave most is predictability. And what unnerves them most is silence. They cannot interpret it. Being tactically unavailable doesn't mean withdrawing from life, becoming cold, or detaching entirely. It means being deliberate with your energy. It means stepping outside the game they're trying to play even before you sit at the table. Not answering instantly, not showing up for every minor drama. Not being the predictable source of attention, advice, or reaction. This subtle unpredictability holds immense power because it shifts the dynamic. You are no longer the person they can reliably pull into their orbit. You are now the one who moves on your own terms. And that unsettles those who depend on control. We are conditioned to believe that silence must be filled, that delays are rude, and that space signals something is wrong. But often, space is exactly what's necessary to regain perspective. You don't need to respond instantly to matters that aren't urgent. You don't need to say yes simply to avoid discomfort. And you certainly don't need to explain every action to people who haven't earned that access. Boundaries aren't walls, they are filters. And the moment you stop offering instant access to everyone, you quickly discover who was there for control, not connection. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that becoming often demands distance, distance from noise, distance from manipulation, and most importantly, distance from the expectation that you owe every part of yourself to those who wouldn't notice your absence unless they needed something. That is the trap. Manipulators do not always desire you. They desire your reaction, your openness, your vulnerability, your predictable pattern. So if you wish to preserve your peace, make your rhythm unpredictable. Disappear for a few hours, skip a conversation, delay a response. Not to punish, but to protect. When you become less accessible, you gain respect, not through fear, but through uncertainty. They cannot anticipate your energy, so they tread carefully. And in that caution, you reclaim control. You remind them silently that your presence is a choice, not a given, that you are not here to be managed, but to be observed until you decide to engage. There is a distinction between being mysterious and being unclear. You don't need to play games or feign aloofness to create space. You simply prioritize stillness over stimulation, intention over reaction, presence over performance. You do not need to pretend disinterest. You merely stop giving immediate responses to those who only appear when they require a piece of you. That subtle shift produces a ripple effect. Suddenly, they cannot plan around you. Suddenly, your silence resonates louder than any confrontation ever could. The beauty of tactical absence is that it naturally attracts sincerity. Genuine people do not panic when you go quiet. They do not take your pause as offense. They respect your timing because they have their own. But manipulators, they flinch, they press, they guilt, they escalate. That reaction tells you everything. It reveals they were never interested in your well-being, only in your availability. And that truth is liberating. Not every message deserves a reply. Not every request deserves energy, and not every invitation is a compliment. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to not show up, not respond, not participate, and watch how quickly the energy shifts. It's not about avoidance or ghosting. It's about creating a sacred boundary between your peace and their desire for control. You step back just enough to gain clarity, but not so far that you lose the strength to respond if necessary. When you demonstrate that you are not desperate for attention, others begin to question why they are. When you show that your time holds value, they realize how much of theirs they've wasted on manipulation. You don't need to explain it. You don't need a grand declaration. You quietly redirect your focus to yourself, your purpose, your path. And when you do, the noise diminishes. The power of this approach lies in the calm it cultivates. You are no longer performing. You are no longer adjusting your mood to fit theirs. You do not watch the clock, waiting to be summoned. You live, move, and breathe at your own pace. And manipulators who rely on urgency, immediacy, and drama cannot follow you there. That distance, that unavailability, it is not disconnection, it is strength. Being unavailable is not about being superior to others. It is about being superior to yourself. It is about refusing to live by someone else's emotional timetable. It is about recognizing that access to your time, mind, and emotional space is a privilege, not a right. The moment you begin treating it that way, you attract people who value you for who you are, not for what they can extract from you on demand. Let them wonder where you went. Let them sit in the quiet. Let them feel the weight of an unanswered message, not out of cruelty, but because you have realized that your peace does not come from being understood by everyone. It comes from understanding yourself deeply enough to know when to stay and when to step away. Let actions outshine words some. People excel at saying exactly what you want to hear at exactly the right moment. They speak of loyalty as if it were a badge earned merely by being near you. They make promises, give speeches, and use words like always, forever, or you can count on me. But when the moment of truth arrives, when pressure exposes who is genuine and who is rehearsed, they vanish or shift blame. That's the nature of manipulators. They do not build trust through consistency. They imitate the language of loyalty to conceal the absence of it. And if you are not careful, you end up rewarding their performance rather than their reality. It's easy to get swept up in grand declarations. Everyone wants to believe that those around them have their back. But true loyalty isn't shown in smooth, easy moments. It's revealed in the storm, in moments of doubt, attack, or challenge. Do they stand beside you, or do they step back and play neutral? Because silence in those times speaks louder than any speech. And it's in those quiet betrayals that you start noticing who only applauds when it costs them nothing. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." That statement slices through the fog. Manipulators know how to manufacture the illusion of dependability. They mirror your language, echo your goals, reflect your pain just enough to earn your trust. But when the emotional cost arrives, they don't invest in the heavy lifting. They don't show up. That's when you learn to watch more and listen less. It's not cynicism. It's clarity. Every time someone declares loyalty, step back and ask, what have they actually done when it mattered? Did they demonstrate consistency? Did they follow through even when it was inconvenient? Or did they vanish when steady ground was needed? Manipulators often rely on emotional deposits. They flatter, agree, and show interest. But the moment your needs interrupt their agenda, their loyalty fractures. You'll notice it in subtle ways first. Delayed responses, half-kept promises, vague excuses. It begins quietly. You don't need to confront them, accuse them, or demand explanations. That only gives them room to perform again, to twist the narrative, to tell you what you want to hear, to reapply the mask. Instead, shift your focus from their words to their track record. That is where the truth lies. Did they come through when it mattered, not when it was easy? Did they remain steady when doubt entered the room? Did they stay loyal when applause was absent? What you reward, you reinforce. If you continue praising performance, you'll keep attracting actors. If you honor words over action, you'll surround yourself with people who rehearse rather than commit. Over time, this drains you, not just emotionally, but psychologically. Because deep down, you start questioning your instincts. You begin wondering if loyalty is merely a performance. You start lowering your standards. But when you reward results, quiet consistency, follow-through, integrity under pressure, you notice something different. Your crowd thins, the noise subsides, but those who remain, those are your people. They didn't need to broadcast loyalty, they simply lived it. They didn't need to say, "I've got you," 100 times. They just did. And these are the people worth investing in. In their presence, you feel secure, not uncertain. There's no need for constant reassurance or dramatic displays. There's a rhythm, reliability, a sense that even when the world shakes, they remain anchored. To find these people, you must become someone who values evidence over emotion. Not cold, not hardened, but wiser, alert, and focused on substance over the script. This doesn't mean abandoning belief in loyalty. It means defining it by standards, not sentiments. It means observing quietly when someone says, "I'll always be there," and waiting for life to give them the chance to prove it. You give them space to show who they truly are, not who they pretend to be. In that space, you remain calm. You stop chasing. You stop pouring energy into people who only know how to receive. Slowly, you cultivate a circle that isn't loud but is solid. Manipulators often believe their words are shields, that if they say the right things, you won't look deeper. That's the mistake. Let them speak. Let them craft their version of loyalty. You don't interrupt. You don't argue. You observe. You watch how they behave when the spotlight fades, when loyalty becomes inconvenient, when being present demands effort. That's when their true character emerges, not the persona they auditioned for. You don't need a large crowd, you need the right few, and you'll find them when you stop rewarding promises and start honoring proof. Those who show up without reminders, who follow through even when uncomfortable, who remain silent about their loyalty because they don't need recognition. They are the ones who build strength around you. Loyalty is not loud. It's not poetic. It doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's a quiet check-in. Sometimes it's unseen support. But it is always consistent. Stop giving your energy to the loudest voices. Start giving it to the steadiest hands. In the end, those who stood with you in silence are far more valuable than those who only praised you publicly. And once you learn to discern that difference, words alone will no longer fool you. So, turn kindness into your strongest weapon. Most people, when faced with manipulation or betrayal, instinctively react with anger, argument, or tension, mirroring the chaos thrown their way. That is the typical response: confrontation, defensiveness, or even cold retaliation. But what if you chose a different approach? What if, instead of matching force with force, you responded with calm, deliberate grace, a composed, quiet, and intentional kind of kindness? This is not weakness. It is not submission. It is a controlled, strategic generosity that unsettles those who thrive on predictability and provocation. This is the energy that makes manipulators pause and question what you are really thinking. When someone expects conflict and instead receives composure and warmth, their footing falters. They no longer know which script to follow, which tactic will regain control, or how to predict your reaction. And it is precisely in that uncertainty that your power grows. Most manipulators rely on predictable responses. They feed on your defensiveness, on your loss of control, on your flinches. Their objective is to provoke you, to regain dominance through your reaction. Once you react even slightly, they have won. But when you meet manipulation with poise, when you answer hostility with a smile, when you remain generous, calm, and composed, not naively but with precision, you break their rhythm. They are left scrambling to regain control, trying to adjust to a dynamic they no longer dictate. You have stepped off their chessboard entirely, and now you play by your own rules. That is far more dangerous to them than any loud retaliation could ever be. This is not about pretending to be kind. It is about choosing your emotional response intentionally, deliberately, with full awareness. There is a fine art to giving exactly enough kindness to disarm, enough warmth to appear open, while keeping your inner self untouched and intact. It is not false. It is deliberate, purposeful, and disorienting to those who expected to provoke a reaction. They believed they had anticipated you, that their actions would elicit anger or defensiveness. Instead, you respond with silence draped in respect, with clarity wrapped in composure. And now they are left to wonder whether they misjudged you, underestimated you, or misunderstood your intentions. Meeting hostility with calm is not only a strategy to expose others, it also mirrors your own growth. You recognize how little power others have over your emotional state. That realization is freeing. This kind of kindness is not performed for approval, recognition, or validation. It is a calculated move, a deliberate tactic signaling that you are no longer reactive, no longer pulled into the chaos they try to force. You give kindness not because it is deserved, but because it creates space. Space between their strategy and your energy, between their chaos and your stillness. This is temporary. It is not permission for them to assume anything. It acts as a smokescreen. While they may relax, believing the storm has passed, believing they have gained leverage over you, you are already detaching, stepping back, and preparing your exit. There are no dramatic goodbyes, no final confrontations, only distance, clarity, and calm. When you leave in this way after having treated someone better than they treated you, it leaves an echo that lingers. They cannot label you bitter. They cannot accuse you of instability. They cannot claim you burned bridges because there was no fire, only an empty space where your presence once existed. And that is what truly disrupts them. Not revenge, not anger, but your calm, deliberate withdrawal. It forces them to face their own behavior directly, without distractions. Most manipulators are unprepared for this, yet this form of kindness is not forgiveness. It is not endless turning of the other cheek. It is not being a doormat. It is about self-possession, about emotional discipline. You are not giving up power, you are quietly reclaiming it. Kindness becomes a cloak, camouflage, a tactical tool to exit cleanly, without mess, without resentment. You leave with dignity intact, energy preserved, and in doing so, they lose something far more valuable than an argument. They lose access. Access is the real power. Who receives your time, your attention, your presence. Manipulators thrive when they can provoke you into defending yourself, explaining your choices, justifying your exit. But when you maintain kindness throughout, offer calm responses and hold your dignity, your departure requires no justification. It becomes untouchable, unassailable. Your actions speak louder than any accusation could. What remains is silence, a silence that forces reflection, confrontation, and insight. Most expect relationships, personal or professional, to end with noise, anger, drama, accusations. But when you end it with strategic kindness, you strip them of their story. You remove the narrative they would use to protect themselves from facing the truth. Without that story, all that remains is the mirror, a reflection of their failure to treat someone with the grace you consistently offered. If they attempt to return, to test boundaries, to gauge your response, your stillness communicates everything. You do not engage. You do not reopen wounds. You have already said what needed to be said through your actions, your composed kindness, and the space you created. You do not chase closure. You do not demand acknowledgement. You move forward, grounded, calm, untouchable. This strategy is quiet, but far from passive. Kind but never weak. Strategic yet never cruel. It is the highest form of emotional mastery, responding with presence when provoked and exiting with peace when wronged. This is not being nice for approval. It is wielding a superior weapon, one that does not destroy but exposes, and in doing so, reveals the truth. Kindness, applied with precision, reveals who is genuine and who is not. It reveals who is grounded and who is chaotic. Most importantly, it reveals who you have become. You no longer allow anyone to disrupt your inner world. You no longer reward drama with attention. You no longer expend energy proving your worth to those who only understand control. You allow them to believe they have won. You let them feel safe. Then without vengeance, you walk away. You disappear from the stage. They are left speaking lines to a character who no longer exists. That is the art. That is the weapon. Kindness, not for their benefit, but for your freedom. Kindness that ends cycles without fueling fires. Kindness that does not bow, but closes the door fully, once and for all. Rise above. Never try to teach them a lesson. They will push you. They will test your patience and probe your limits. And when you finally see the pattern clearly, when the lies, the guilt trips, and the silent treatments no longer have power over you, the urge to teach them a lesson can feel overwhelming. You want them to understand the depth of their wrongdoing. You want them to feel what you felt, to grasp how profoundly they crossed the line. But that voice is not wisdom speaking, it is your ego. It seeks closure, justice, validation, a sense of moral equilibrium. Manipulators do not learn through lectures. They do not grow through confrontation or correction. The more you attempt to teach them, the more skillfully they twist the narrative until it is you who appears emotional, unstable, or even cruel. This is how they win, not by overpowering you directly, but by pulling you into their chaos and orchestrating the dance to their rhythm. True power resides in restraint, not the kind that conceals weakness, but the kind that demonstrates how little their behavior can disturb your peace. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop attempting to make them understand, that is when you rise above the manipulation entirely. You do not need to raise your voice to be heard. You do not need to point out their flaws for them to feel the consequences of their actions. Silence communicates more than any words could. Distance speaks louder than arguments. Absence becomes the most powerful statement you can make. It does not scream. It resonates. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." When you deliberately choose not to react, not to correct, not to teach, you protect your energy. Manipulators live on reaction. They thrive on emotional highs and lows, on being the center of attention, whether through love or hate. But when you remain quiet, not cold, not bitter, simply still, they begin to lose their grip. Their control diminishes, not because you fought back, but because you simply removed yourself from their game. Teaching someone a lesson presumes they care enough to learn. It presumes they possess the self-awareness required for reflection. But manipulation is rarely naive. It is deliberate, repetitive, and polished. They know exactly what they are doing. They simply did not expect you to see it. So when you do see it, do not waste time attempting to guide them. Do not expend words on clarity they will never honor. That lesson you feel compelled to teach, let life teach it. Let natural consequences handle it. Let the absence of your presence, your energy, your attention serve as the education. That above all unsettles a manipulator. Not a lecture, not an argument, but the quiet withdrawal of influence and access. You become a blank space, unreadable, untriggered, uninfluenced. To someone who relies on emotional manipulation, that is terrifying. They are incapable of navigating calm waters. They require drama to function, validation to thrive, attention to survive. Remove that and their structure collapses, slowly, quietly, irreversibly. And here is the truth. When you outgrow someone, it is not your responsibility to announce it. Growth is silent. It unfolds privately, in moments when you choose peace over their patterns, boundaries over explanations. You do not slam doors. You simply stop opening them. Over time, they realize something has changed. You are no longer emotionally available, no longer entangled in their games, no longer providing the reactions they rely on to feel powerful. That change shakes them, not immediately, but inevitably. There is profound dignity in walking away calmly rather than with chaos, in allowing your evolution to speak for itself. You are not responsible for making them see the lesson. You are responsible for protecting your mind, preserving your clarity, and keeping your energy intact from someone who never intended to change. That is the essence of Stoicism. Not suppressing emotions, but mastering them. Not imposing truth on others, but refusing to waste it on those unready to receive it. And the best part, you do not have to carry bitterness. You do not have to seek revenge. You do not have to linger in the past, replaying every manipulation, every cruel tactic. You can release it, not because they deserve peace, but because you do. You can let go, not with resentment, but with firm resolve. Freedom does not always arrive through battle. Often it comes from simply choosing not to be understood by someone who weaponized confusion against you. Strength does not come from confronting every manipulator. It comes from standing rooted when they try to shake you, remaining still when they attempt to provoke, and prioritizing clarity over chaos. When they finally realize that you are no longer teachable, not because you lack insight, but because you have transcended the lesson, they are left with nothing to grasp, nothing to manipulate, nothing to anchor their tactics to. You have evolved beyond the need to teach them, and that in itself becomes the most powerful lesson. You did not lower yourself to expose them. You did not sacrifice your peace to prove a point. You remained composed, moved in silence, and let them wonder. You allowed them to sit with the void your absence created. Perhaps they will change. Perhaps they will not. But by then it no longer matters, because you have already moved on. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. You did not simply walk away, you evolved. That evolution is something no manipulator can follow. Growth does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It quietly, completely leaves. And when you prioritize peace over power struggles, you do not merely escape manipulation, you reclaim yourself fully. If this message resonated, watch the next video on the screen. It was created for minds like yours. Thank you sincerely for being part of Stoic Sage Academy.